So looking at respiratory rate, that's the number of breaths per minute. So you look at number of times you inhale and exhale per 60 seconds. On average, it's 12 to 18 breaths per minute. So BPM is breaths per minute. We've seen beats per minute when we talked about the heart, but this is the lungs, so it's breaths per minute. Respiratory rate can change based on oxygen needs. So this can change because you are exercising. Your respiratory rate increases because your muscles need more oxygen so that they can make ATP so they can contract. It'll change if you're resting because you don't need as much oxygen. You're not moving around or doing anything. So sleeping, you don't need to breathe as often. So it can change. So respiratory rate isn't a fixed thing. It can change based on what's happening inside your body. We also look at respiratory minute volume. So that is the volume of air moved per minute. So this is how much air is going to move in and out of your lungs in a unit of time, meaning a minute. So we multiply your respiratory rate by your tidal volume. So the tidal volume, remember, is the mils per breath that are moving in and out of your lungs. So the amount of air that's going in and out. Respiratory rate is breaths per minute. So we get mils per minute. So how much air is moving when we multiply this? So there's a total amount of air that's going to go into your lungs in a unit of time, meaning a minute. So this is going to tell you just kind of how much of the air is going to go in. And again, this is going to increase. If you increase your respiratory rate, you're increasing the mils per minute of air that's going in. We also look at alveolar ventilation because some of the air remains in our tubes or the conducting portion of the lungs. So some of the air never gets to the magic area where gas exchange can occur, which is the alveoli. So we look at alveolar ventilation as the amount of air that can actually get into that alveoli per minute. So this is the amount of air that's available for gas exchange. Available for gas exchange. If the air never reaches the alveoli, well, then it can never be used for gas exchange. So think of it sometimes in kind of a tube or a hose, a water hose. You're spraying out water and you turn off the water. Well, some of the water's staying in the tubes and doesn't get out. It's the same thing. Some of the air never gets down into the alveoli. Why? Well, eventually you increase your volume of your thoracic cavity and decrease the intrapulmonary pressure. Well, you can only do that so much. So air will stop again when the pressure is equalized, and there'll be stop movement so that air never gets down into the alveoli. So now looking at gas exchange, again, I mentioned it a couple times, mentioning it again. So this is either between the lungs and the blood or the blood and the tissues. External respiration is going to be the blood, and this is specifically going to be the pulmonary capillaries and the lungs, and that's specifically going to be the alveoli, again, where the magic happens. Internal respiration is all in the inside, nothing to do with the outside. And this is between the blood again, but this is going to be systemic capillaries. Can't spell today. Capillaries. And the tissues. And first, gas is going to go into the interstitial or around the fluid around the tissue cells and then into the tissue cells. But inspiration is between the systemic capillaries and that surrounding of the tissue cells. So we're going to talk about these. This is going to depend on the properties of gases and how they're dissolved in blood and how much of the gases are available. So we're going to talk about that next. We talked about Boyle's law. Now we're going to talk about Dalton's law, and that's law of partial pressures. What does that mean? Well, when we have room air, we have a mix of gases. You're not just breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. In the air that you're breathing, there's a mix of oxygen, there's some carbon dioxide, and a lot of it's nitrogen. So, what we say with Dalton's law is each one of these gases exerts a pressure because you have oxygen molecules hitting the side of the walls in the container that's exerting a pressure. You have carbon dioxide, same thing, going and moving around and exerting a pressure. And then you have nitrogen, same thing. So we can look at partial pressure is just the pressure that's being exerted by oxygen or by carbon dioxide or by nitrogen. But the total pressure of the gases in the room is all of them added together. So it's the partial pressure of oxygen plus the partial pressure of carbon dioxide plus the partial pressure of nitrogen. And what we say and how we calculate it is the amount of percentage in the mix. So we're going to look at partial pressures, and I'll show you the kind of the math in the next slide. Not that I'm going to make you do it, just to kind of further understand it. So the percent of oxygen is going to help determine the percent that the partial pressure is. So we're going to look at it. If you have a lower percentage of oxygen, well, then you're going to have a lower partial pressure because there's less oxygen molecules that are hitting the wall and causing a pressure. So that's when we talk about it's directly proportional, where it both go down. They both go in the same direction, or if they both go up, the partial pressure, the concentration or percentage of oxygen increases, the partial pressure increases. So they both go up together or they go down together. Why do we care? Well, how do we determine concentration gradients? Because it's based on percentages, then that's going to tell us how these molecules or these gases are going to move. So if you increase the concentration of oxygen, then you're going to go from a high concentration to a low concentration. Again, it's the same movement. So if you're increasing the percentage, you're increasing the partial pressure. So you have a higher amount of oxygen so that it can move from high to low concentration. So this is what I mean. I'm not going to make you do the math. It's just so you can kind of understand. If you look at total atmospheric pressure, so it's the total amount of pressure that's outside your body, making up kind of all these different gases, is 760 millimeters per mercury. That's just our pressure measurement. We know that nitrogen makes up 78.6% of our air that we're breathing. So if we turn this into a decimal point, so move the decimal point over 2 places, and it's 0.786, and we multiply it by a total, so the percentage or the fraction of what nitrogen is adding to that total is 597 millimeters per mercury. So that's the partial pressure of nitrogen. So it's percentage of the 760. Oxygen makes up 20.9% of the air. Same thing, move decimal point over 2 places, we get the kind of decimal, the fraction, multiply it by the total. This is the partial pressure of oxygen. So why is it significantly less? Well, there's significantly less oxygen that's making up the air. You would expect, since there's more nitrogen molecules making up this air, that those nitrogen molecules are going to make up more of the pressure that's being exerted on the actual walls. So there's more nitrogen molecules everywhere. Well, they're bouncing off the walls more often because there's a higher percentage versus oxygen. Sorry. So there's a higher partial pressure of nitrogen than there is of oxygen based on just the amount of oxygen molecules that are there. Sum of the total. All of the mix is going to make up the total. So each one has to make up the total of 760. So again, the partial pressure is the mix calculated by multiplying its fraction or its decimal point by the total. And that's going to get your partial pressure. So you can look at the different partial pressures in different areas. So this is going to come into play of movement of gases when we're talking about internal and external respiration. So we can always look at kind of the differences. So if we have dry air and alveolar gas, so alveolar gas is a little less than dry air of the oxygen amount because some gets lost in your conducting zone. This is what's actually getting into your alveoli. But look again, difference, so concentration differences. So think about where oxygen is going to move. It's going to move from high concentration to lower concentration. So that's going to be, again, how we're going to show movement of oxygen and carbon dioxide is you're going to look at the levels, the numbers, and think about how they're moving, which they're always going to move from high to low. So higher and move to lower. Even if it's slightly, still a difference, they're not equal, still going to move. Now talking about Henry's law. Henry's law is talking about gases that are interacting with liquids. Well, why are we talking about this? Well, what's the major liquid that we've been discussing? Blood. What's happening with external respiration? Again, air in the alveoli goes into a liquid in the blood because it's going from air in your alveoli to inside your body in your bloodstream. So what we're looking at is, again, still pressures. So, and we're looking at partial pressures of the gas. So oftentimes, again, with this, we're either looking at oxygen or we're looking at carbon dioxide. If there's a lower partial pressure of oxygen up here, so lower PO2, because we have kind of less partial pressure, larger volume, so it's again bringing you back to Boyle's law. So there's a lower pressure here in this instance. Lower pressure means that there's less oxygen dissolved in the liquid. So that's again when we get directly proportional, meaning they go in the same direction. Lower partial pressure, lower oxygen. And think about it this way. There's a lot more space for the molecules to move around in this area. So this molecule can go up and this can go over here and this can go over here and then they're here. There's less interaction that has to happen between the air and the liquid because we need interaction for it to go into the liquid. So there's less chances of the molecules going down and dissolving the liquid with a lower pressure, more places for it to move around and go to. Now you increase the pressure. So if you increase the partial pressure of oxygen, then you're going to increase the amount of oxygen that's going into the liquid. Same kind of component. Again, you're decreasing the amount of space, so you're increasing pressure. More likelihood, these molecules have less space to move, that there's more likelihood that they're going to hit the liquid and dissolve into it. So if you increase the partial pressure, you're increasing the amount of oxygen that's going into the liquid. If you have kind of equilibrium, the partial pressures in both is going to be the same. So you're going to increase the kind of amount of gas that's in the liquid, and eventually they'll equal out. But just looking at it again, if you have a higher partial pressure in the air, then you're going to have a higher partial pressure in the liquid, or amount of gas that's going to be in the solution. And we do change the amount of gas that can be dissolved in liquid based on solubility and temperature. Temperature is a major factor. So we're going to talk about that a little later. So this can change based on what's going on inside your body. So this is just giving you another example of Henry's law. So think about it in soda, and it's carbonated. When you're making soda, you put it in under pressure. So the gas has to be forced into solution, and eventually it'll equalize but you're going to push the equal amount that's going to be in the liquid that's going to be in the air that's in the soda can. So under pressure, gas molecules are forced into solution until you have your equilibrium. Because again, you have higher pressure, then you're going to have higher concentration in that liquid. Then when you open the soda can and you just leave it, well, now there's a lot more movement of the carbon dioxide, so there's a lot lower pressure because the carbon dioxide can leave through the opening of the can. So carbon dioxide is going to go from high concentration or high pressure to low pressure, so it's going to move out. That's why you open it, hear that sound. If you leave it out, there's less pressure, and so more is going to leave solution as well. Because you have lower pressure, then more of it is going to leave solution. So you're going to have a lower concentration in the liquid as well. Eventually you have equilibrium and you have flat soda. So again, that's why they're directly proportionate. Increase the pressure, increase the movement into solution. Decrease the pressure, decrease the movement into solution, or the concentration in solution. Why are we talking about this? So with external respiration, again, blood is so gas that's in your alveoli is going to move into your blood, or opposite. If it's oxygen, it's going to move into the blood. If it's carbon dioxide, it's going to move out of the blood. Blood coming into the lungs has a lower partial pressure of oxygen than the alveoli and a higher partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now think of just generally what you want. You want oxygen to go into the body. So where is it going to move? Higher partial pressure to lower. You want to get rid of carbon dioxide. Well, you want it to go from higher partial pressure to lower. So just think about what you want it to move. You want oxygen into the body, carbon dioxide out of the body. So oxygen is going to move from the air, which has a higher partial pressure, to the blood, which has a lower partial pressure. Carbon dioxide is going to move the opposite because that's what we want. It's going to move from the pulmonary capillaries, or the blood, because it's going to be a higher partial pressure there, into the alveoli. When we're taking in oxygen, we're going to have deoxygenated blood, meaning it doesn't have oxygen attached to our hemoglobin. Remember, hemoglobin is what's going to carry the iron in the middle of the heme pigment and the protein. So hemoglobin is going to pick up oxygen. So if we have deoxygenated and then we pick up blood, then it's going to be oxygen, or pick up oxygen by the hemoglobin, and it's going to be oxygenated. So again, looking at picture form. So this is the alveolus or singular alveoli. And this is our respiratory membrane, our squamous pneumocyte type 1 squamous cells of the alveolus, and the basement membrane, and then the endothelial cells of the capillary. Look at the partial pressures in the alveolus. The partial pressure of oxygen is about 100. Remember we said 159, but some is lost. It doesn't get all the way down to the alveoli. Then the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is going to be 40. So this is the way blood flow through the pulmonary capillary. Remember, we're coming in deoxygenated from our pulmonary arteries, coming through the pulmonary capillaries to pick up oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. That's the point of what's happening in external respiration. Pick up oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide. So look at the partial pressure of oxygen coming in. It's 40. Oxygen and all of this is going to move from high concentration to low concentration. So where is oxygen going to move? The partial pressure with Henry's law is it's going to be forced into solution. So oxygen is going to go into the blood. Higher number over here, lower number over here. Now look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide that's coming in. 45 versus 40. Not as significant of a change or difference, but still a difference. It's not equilibrium. So what's going to happen to the carbon dioxide? The higher amount of partial pressure in solution, less partial pressure in the alveolar air, carbon dioxide is going to move this way. It's going to move out of your pulmonary capillaries and into the alveolus. And look what happens. They're going to do that until equilibrium's reached. So then the numbers are going to be the same. So you look over here, 100, 100, 40, 40. So they're going to move until they're equal numbers. And then we're going to go to the pulmonary veins, back to the heart, and go to systemic circulation, which is going to determine internal respiration, which we'll talk about next. So internal respiration, again, is systemic gas exchange. This is going to be the partial pressure of oxygen that leaves the lungs in your pulmonary veins does go down a little bit. So that's why you're going to see, okay, I just saw 100 in the pulmonary capillaries, and now I'm seeing 95. Sometimes when we mix with the blood of the capillaries, then it's going to drop a little bit in the pulmonary veins because you're going around the conducting passageways and there's less exchange. So it's going to drop a little bit. That's why you're just going to see the difference between 100 and 95. Oxygen then moves from the systemic capillaries into the tissues, and carbon dioxide moves from the tissues to the systemic capillaries. That is internal respiration. So again, looking at the numbers, we've dropped a little bit, but we're still close to 100. We're at 95 now. Same partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Now again, think about what is happening in internal respiration. The tissues want the oxygen and they want to get rid of the carbon dioxide. So think about how the movement's going to do. It's going to go from high concentration to low concentration. As long as these numbers are not the same, there will be movement. So look at the partial pressure of oxygen in the systemic capillaries, 95, versus the partial pressure of the tissues in the fluid. So again, it's going to be interstitial fluid, and then it's going to go into the cells. So the partial pressure of the fluid of oxygen is going to be 40. Well, again, we move from high partial pressure to low partial pressure, high concentration to low concentration. So oxygen is going to go from the systemic capillaries into the interstitial fluid. That's what we want. We want to deliver oxygen to your tissue cells. Well, carbon dioxide's been made by the tissue cells and is in the interstitial fluid. We want to get rid of it. We want to bring it to the alveoli so that it can be released and breathed out. So again, look at the partial pressures. It's not as significant as a change as we saw before. We have partial pressure of carbon dioxide here is 40. Partial pressure in the interstitial fluid is 45. Not the same number, still going to have movement until we even out. So until we're equal, carbon dioxide is going to move from the interstitial fluid into the capillaries. Think about that's what you need. So now we get the partial pressure of oxygen, which is 40, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, which is 45, because we've gotten to equilibrium. So there's no more movement because they're equal on both sides. Then remember, that's what's going back and then going into circulation. That's going to come back into the pulmonary. So we're going to have the cycle again. And we look at certain factors that are going to kind of look at and change these exchanges. So pulmonary meaning external respiration and systemic meaning internal respiration. First, the partial pressures. If those numbers are different, then you're going to have a different amount of gases that are going to move. Surface area that's available for gas exchange is a big thing too. So if you have areas where, again, you have alveoli that are open, gas exchange can happen all along, then that's going to be good. If all of a sudden you have a collapse in the alveoli, well, there's a lot less surface area or room for gas exchange to occur. So that's going to affect the rate of external respiration. The diffusion distance is another major one. So if all of a sudden, again, same thing, if you have alveoli and you have some mucus that's getting down or infection or something like that, well, the distance that the gas has to move is larger. It's a lot easier for it to move through that than to move through this. So if you're increasing the diffusion distance, then that can affect your exchange, because the longer the distance, the harder it is for it to diffuse. Can also change the solubility of the gases based on what's happening in the body. We'll talk about more of that later. Molecular weight of the gas, that doesn't change when we're talking about oxygen or carbon dioxide, so that's pretty stable, but solubility can change. But the major ones that are changing is going to be partial pressure, surface area, and our diffusion distance.